At 1:44 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's phone rang. 3 minutes later, her doorbell camera went completely dark. And what happened in that short window didn't just raise questions, it changed the entire direction of the investigation. Because when the FBI finally decoded that call, they realized it didn't come from a random number. It came from someone who already knew exactly where Nancy was and what was about to happen next. What you're about to see is the full breakdown of that 1:44 a.m. phone call, the exact timeline leading up to it, the critical 3-minute gap after it, and the chain of events investigators now believe was executed with precise coordination. We'll connect every major piece of evidence, the final hours before Nancy went missing, the suspicious timing of the camera shutdown, the overlooked signals in phone records, and the growing suspicion that this wasn't a random act, but a planned sequence tied directly to that call. By the end of this video, you'll understand why investigators are no longer treating that call as a detail. They're treating it as the trigger. If you're into real investigative breakdowns, hidden clues, and true crime cases that go beyond the surface, make sure you stay until the end of this video. Every detail builds into a much bigger picture you don't want to miss. And if you want more deep dive crime documentaries like this, subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications, because the next case we break down may reveal something even more disturbing than this one.
I am going to be careful. And I am going to show you why that 1:44 a.m. phone call is the single most underreported detail in the entire Nancy Guthrie investigation. Stay with me all the way through. Subscribe to Crime View if you have not already and turn on notifications, because this video reframes everything. Part 1. The evening that ended everything. To understand the significance of a phone call made at 1:44 in the morning, you have to understand the full timeline of the evening that preceded it. Because this was not a random night. This was not a night Nancy Guthrie spent doing anything unusual. It was one of the most ordinary evenings of her life. And that ordinariness is exactly what makes everything that followed so chilling. January 31st, 2026, a Saturday. At 5:32 in the evening, Nancy Guthrie called an Uber from her home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. She was 84 years old. She used a walker for mobility. She took critical daily medication, and on the evening of January 31st, she was doing something she did regularly, going to dinner at her eldest daughter Annie's house just 4 miles away. The Uber picked her up. She arrived at Annie's home. Annie was there with her husband, Tommaso Cioni. The three of them spent approximately 4 hours together. Dinner, a game, normal family time, nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Annie's pacemaker data from that entire evening shows completely normal baseline cardiac activity. A woman who was comfortable, relaxed, and happy spending time with her family. At some point between 9:30 and 9:45 in the evening, dinner wrapped up. Tommaso Cioni drove Nancy home. Not an Uber this time, not a cab. Her son-in-law, the man married to her daughter, Annie. Tommaso drove Nancy the 4 miles back to her home in the Catalina Foothills. At 9:48 p.m., Nancy arrived home. At 9:50 p.m., her garage door closed. That is confirmed. That specific timestamp, 9:50 p.m., is the last externally verified normal moment of Nancy Guthrie's life as a free woman. The garage door closed. She was inside. She was alone. And then nothing. For 4 full hours until everything went wrong. 4 hours of silence between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. 4 hours during which Nancy presumably went through her evening routine, took her medication, settled in, perhaps watched television, perhaps read, perhaps went to bed. 4 hours of completely normal life before the masked figure appeared outside her home. But here is what the 4-hour silence conceals. Something was happening during those 4 hours. Not to Nancy, not inside that house, but in the coordination of the people who were coming for her. Someone during those 4 hours was finalizing a plan, confirming a timeline, making sure everything was ready. And at 1:44 in the morning, 3 minutes before the camera was disabled, someone made a phone call to Nancy Guthrie's phone. That call is the fingerprint on the plan, and we are going to examine every aspect of it. Part 2. What phone records reveal that no other evidence can. Before I walk through what investigators found in Annie's phone records, I want to spend some time explaining what phone records actually reveal. Because I think a lot of people underestimate how much forensic information is embedded in a single call. When the FBI subpoenas phone records in a case like this, they are not just getting a list of numbers that called or were called. They are getting a comprehensive forensic picture of every communication event that device was involved in. Every call, every text, every data transmission, time-stamped to the second. And for each call, they get the originating number, the receiving number, the duration, and critically, the cell tower data that shows the approximate geographic location of both devices at the time of the call. In a major metropolitan area like Tucson, cell tower triangulation can place a device within a few hundred meters of its actual location. In some cases, with multiple tower pings, significantly more precisely than that. What this means is that when investigators identified the 1:44 a.m. call on Annie's phone, they did not just identify who called her. They identified where that person was when they made the call. And that geographic location, combined with the identity of the caller, is what investigators have been sitting on for 70 days. Now, I want to be precise about what has been publicly confirmed and what has been reported through investigative sourcing. The existence of a final communication on Annie's device before she was taken has been referenced in investigative reporting.
The fact that this communication led back to someone who had been in Nancy's life, someone connected to the dinner that same evening, has been reported by outlets that have sourced information from people familiar with the investigation. The specific nature of that call, whether it was a voice call or a text message, what was said, whether Nancy answered or whether it went unanswered, those details have not been publicly confirmed. But the forensic significance of a communication made 3 minutes before the camera went dark has not been lost on investigators, and it should not be lost on us. Because here is the fundamental question that this call raises. Who calls an 84-year-old woman at 1:44 in the morning? Not a telemarketer, not a wrong number, not a casual acquaintance. At 1:44 a.m., people who call you are people who have a specific reason to contact you at that exact moment. People who know you are awake, or people who are trying to find out if you are awake. 3 minutes before the camera went dark. Think about that timing. 3 minutes. That is not a coincidence. That is coordination. Part 3. The timeline inside 3 minutes. Let me walk you through exactly what happened in the 3 minutes between 1:44 a.m. and 1:47 a.m. Because when you look at those 3 minutes as a sequence rather than isolated events, a picture emerges that is deeply significant. 1:44 a.m. The phone call is made to Nancy's device. Whatever the content of that call, whether it was answered, whether it conveyed information, whether it was a signal of some kind, it happens at this precise moment while Nancy is inside her home, while the masked figure or someone coordinating with the masked figure is somewhere in the vicinity of the Catalina foothills. 1:47 a.m. 3 minutes later, the masked figure appears at Nancy's doorbell camera and disables it. Not 3 hours later, not 3 days later, 3 minutes after that phone call. The individual who disabled that camera arrived at the specific camera location with the specific knowledge of how to disable it and did so within 3 minutes of a phone call made to the person inside the house. The proximity of these two events in time is not random. In any organized operation, a communication 3 minutes before execution serves a specific purpose. It is either a final confirmation that the target is in position, a signal that the window is open, or an attempt to determine something about the situation inside the house before proceeding. Think about it from an operational standpoint. If you were about to approach someone's home and disabled their security camera, what would you want to know 3 minutes before you do it? You would want to know that the person inside is where you expect them to be, that nothing has changed since your last reconnaissance, that the plan is still executable. A phone call at 1:44 a.m. to the person inside the house is a way of checking the situation, of confirming, of making sure the window is still open. And 3 minutes later, the operation began. Now, consider the alternative explanation, that the 1:44 a.m. call was completely unrelated to the abduction, that it was a wrong number or a misdial or some innocent middle-of-the-night communication that had nothing to do with what happened 3 minutes later. In a normal situation, that alternative would deserve equal consideration, but this is not a normal situation. This is a case in which every other piece of evidence points toward a coordinated, planned, targeted operation carried out by people with inside knowledge of Nancy Guthrie's life. In that context, a phone call made 3 minutes before the operation began is not something investigators can treat as coincidental, and they have not. Part 4. The Internet outage. What nobody connected to the call. Here is something that has been significantly underreported in the coverage of this case, and something that becomes dramatically more significant when you understand the 1:44 a.m. phone call context. In early March, approximately 5 weeks after Nancy disappeared, FBI investigators began knocking on doors in Nancy's neighborhood with a very specific question. They were asking residents about a mysterious internet outage that occurred in the area on the night of January 31st into the early morning of February 1st. Several residents reported that their Ring camera footage from that night was missing, not corrupted, not damaged, missing, as in the footage that should have been recorded during that window simply was not there. Ring cameras, like NY's Google Nest doorbell camera, sync their footage to cloud servers. If the internet connection is disrupted, the local recording may not upload. And if someone engineered an internet disruption in the neighborhood deliberately, they could potentially create gaps in the surveillance record from multiple properties simultaneously. Now, connect that to the phone call. Modern smartphones rely on cellular data for many functions, but they also connect to Wi-Fi networks when available. If there was a deliberate internet disruption in the neighborhood around the time of the abduction, it would affect not just the security cameras of multiple properties, but potentially the Wi-Fi dependent functions of devices in the area, including potentially the wireless sync functions of NY's pacemaker monitoring system. The FBI's investigation into the internet outage, combined with the 1:44 a.m. phone call, suggests a level of operational sophistication that goes well beyond what you would expect from an opportunistic kidnapping. Someone who deliberately disrupts neighborhood internet connectivity before an abduction is not improvising. That is planning. That is counter-surveillance. That is the behavior of an operation designed to minimize the digital footprint of what happened that night. And investigators asking specifically about January 11th, 3 weeks before the abduction, suggest there may have been a test run, a reconnaissance visit to assess the neighborhood's surveillance coverage, to understand which cameras existed, where they were positioned, and what their coverage zones were. All of this before February 1st. All of this in preparation. Part 5. The blood on the porch. There is a detail in this case that has appeared in investigative reporting and that I want to address carefully because it connects directly to the timeline of the phone call and the camera disabled, and it changes the picture of what the 41 minutes actually contained. Investigators found blood, dried blood, on Nancy Guthrie's front porch. Now, dried blood on a porch is significant for 2 reasons. First, it suggests that whatever happened to Nancy during the 41 minutes involved some degree of physical trauma, something that caused bleeding before or during her removal from the property. Second, the fact that the blood was dried suggests it had been there for some time before investigators arrived and processed the scene. But here is the detail that connects to the phone call timeline. The front porch is the area immediately around the doorbell camera, the area where the masked figure appeared at 1:47 a.m., the area where the abduction likely began from NY's perspective. If the blood on the porch is NY's, then whatever caused that blood happened in the immediate vicinity of the camera, in the same location where the camera was disabled 3 minutes after the 1:44 a.m. phone call. Which means the sequence of events was phone call at 1:44, camera disabled at 1:47, physical confrontation at or near the front entrance, removal of Nancy from the property, and then 41 minutes of documented physiological distress in her pacemaker data before the sync stopped at 2:28. That sequence from phone call to physical confrontation to removal is not the sequence of a random crime. It is the sequence of an operation, phased, coordinated, executed, with a specific beginning, middle, and end. And the phone call at 1:44 is the starting gun. Part 6. Who makes this call? The profile. Let me now build the profile of the person or persons who made that 1:44 a.m. call. Not a name, no names, but a profile, a set of characteristics that the evidence requires this person to have, because understanding who could have made this call is central to understanding who took Nancy Guthrie. The first characteristic is access to NY's phone number. This sounds simple, but it is not. Nancy Guthrie's personal cell phone number is not in a public directory. It is not on a website. It is a private number shared with family, close friends, medical providers, and people in her immediate personal circle. Whoever called her at 1:44 a.m. had her number, which means they had been in contact with her before or had obtained her number from someone who had. The second characteristic is knowledge of NY's location at that specific moment. At 1:44 in the morning, Nancy was inside her home alone. The only people who knew with certainty that she was home alone at that hour were people who knew her routine. People who knew that Tommaso had dropped her off at 9:50 p.m. People who knew she had no visitors scheduled. People who knew she would not have anyone else in the house overnight. The third characteristic is timing precision. The call was made 3 minutes before the camera was disabled. That precision suggests either direct coordination with the person who disabled the camera, or the person who made the call is the person who disabled the camera, or both. In any of these scenarios, the caller had operational awareness of the abduction plan, and their call was timed to serve a specific function within that plan. The fourth characteristic connects to the investigative reporting that the final communication on NY's phone led back to someone who had been inside her life, someone connected to the evening's events, someone who had been at that dinner or connected to someone who had been at that dinner just hours before. Put those four characteristics together: someone with NY's private number, someone who knew she was home alone at 1:44 a.m., someone with operational awareness of the abduction plan, someone connected to the events of the evening of January 31st. That is not a large circle. Part 7. The dinner guests and what they knew. I want to go back to the dinner at Annie's house on the evening of January 31st, because the people at that dinner are the people who had the most complete real-time picture of NY's plans and location that evening, and that real-time knowledge is directly relevant to the 1:44 a.m. call at Annie and Tommaso's home that evening. The confirmed attendees were Nancy, Annie, and Tommaso. 3 people, a mother and her daughter and son-in-law, a normal family dinner. All 3 of those people knew Nancy was going home that night. All 3 knew Tommaso was driving her. All 3 knew she would be arriving home around 9:50. All 3 had NY's phone number. All 3 knew she would be alone in the house for the night. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. I am not accusing Annie, Tommaso, or any member of the Guthrie family of any involvement in NY's disappearance. Multiple investigative reports have addressed the family's cooperation with law enforcement, their public cooperation with the investigation, and the devastating impact of NY's disappearance on everyone who loves her. But here is the investigative reality that cannot be ignored. The people who were at that dinner are the people with the most complete real-time knowledge of NY's situation on the evening of January 31st. If the 1:44 a.m. call came from someone with knowledge of where Nancy was and when she arrived home, the question investigators ask is, who told them? Who passed that information? And is there anyone in the orbit of that dinner who had connections that investigators need to examine carefully? That is not an accusation. That is an investigative framework, and it is the framework the FBI has been working inside since the first week. The reported fact that NY's final phone communication led back to someone who had been in her life, someone connected to that evening, is the piece that makes the dinner timeline so critical, because it suggests the information flow that enabled the 1:44 a.m. call originated within the circle of people who spent that Saturday evening with Nancy. Part 8. The phone left behind. NY's phone was left behind in her house. This is a confirmed fact. When investigators processed the scene on February 1st after NY's family reported her missing, her phone was there, on the counter or near where she had last used it inside the house, left behind. The significance of this cannot be overstated. An 84-year-old woman who was taken involuntarily from her home in the middle of the night did not have time to gather her essential items. She did not grab her phone. She did not grab her medication. Both were left behind. But for our purposes, the phone left behind means something very specific about the 1:44 a.m. call. If someone called Nancy at 1:44 and Nancy answered, if there was a conversation, that conversation happened on a device that was subsequently left at the scene, and that device became evidence immediately.
The call records on that phone are preserved. The FBI has them. Every incoming call, every outgoing call, every text message, every data event, all of it time-stamped and preserved on a device that was recovered intact. This is not a situation where the evidence was destroyed or the phone was taken. The phone was left. The records survived. And here is why that matters for the investigation. The 1:44 a.m. call, whatever its content, is not lost. It is documented on a device the FBI has had in their possession since February 1st. The number that made that call has been known to investigators from the very first day, which means the question is not whether investigators know who called. They know. The question is what they are doing with that knowledge, and the 70-day silence on this specific detail suggests that what they are doing with it is building a prosecution, carefully, methodically, without tipping off the person whose number appears in that final timestamp on Nancy Guthrie's phone. Part 9. The phone signal 200 meters away. Here is a development that most coverage has reported as a standalone story, but that becomes far more significant when you connect it to the 1:44 a.m. call. Investigators detected Nancy Guthrie's phone signal 200 meters from her home, and the FBI responded in a way that, as the reporting describes it, no one outside the investigation has been able to fully explain. Now, this is the phone that was left behind inside her house, Nancy's personal cell phone, the device that received the 1:44 a.m. call, left on the counter or somewhere inside the locked Tucson home. How does a phone left inside a locked house generate a signal 200 meters away? There are several possible explanations. The most innocent: the phone was moved by investigators for processing, and the signal was a data event associated with law enforcement forensic analysis. Possible. But there is a second explanation that is significantly more disturbing. If someone entered the property after the abduction, before law enforcement fully secured the scene and removed the phone, that phone could have generated a signal in a location 200 meters away because someone carried it there. The FBI's response to the detected signal was notable enough to be reported specifically, which suggests it was significant, which suggests investigators treated it as meaningful rather than administrative. And if someone took that phone from the scene and carried it 200 meters away, that person had access to the house after the abduction, had a reason to remove or move the phone, and was potentially attempting to create a digital trail suggesting Nancy was somewhere other than where she actually was. All of which connects back to the 1:44 a.m. call, because whoever made that call knew the phone was there, knew what was on it, and may have had a very specific reason to want that phone in a different location than Nancy's kitchen counter. Part 10. The Ring camera at 1:52 a.m., 5 miles away. 8 minutes after the camera at Nancy's home was disabled at 1:47 a.m., a Ring camera located 5 miles from her property captured something significant. A man wearing backpacks attempting to open a locked gate at 1:52 in the morning, 5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's house. The FBI confirmed they were reviewing that footage. The timing, 1:52 a.m., 5 miles away, 8 minutes after the camera disabled at Nancy's home, places this individual in a location consistent with having left Nancy's property after the camera was disabled and moving away from the scene on foot or by vehicle. Now, connect this to the 1:44 a.m. phone call. If the call was made at 1:44, the camera was disabled at 1:47, and someone carrying backpacks was 5 miles away at 1:52, that is a sequence of movements that covers 5 miles in approximately 5 to 8 minutes.
In a vehicle, 5 miles in 5 minutes is completely achievable at highway speeds or even surface street speeds in a residential area at 2 in the morning with no traffic. This is not someone on foot. This is someone who moved from Nancy's property by vehicle rapidly with what appears to be operational purpose. And the backpacks. The man on the Ring camera was wearing and carrying backpacks. The masked individual who disabled Nancy's camera was also carrying backpacks. The FBI connected these images early in the investigation. The consistency in the profile, masked or hooded individual, backpacks, specific time frame, is part of an evidentiary picture that investigators have been building. From the 1:44 a.m. call to the 1:47 camera disable to the 1:52 Ring camera footage 5 miles away to the 2:12 motion detection to the 2:28 pacemaker sync cutoff, there is a continuous time-stamped thread of events that tells the story of Nancy Guthrie's abduction from beginning to end, and the 1:44 a.m. call is the thread that starts it all. Part 11. What the 911 call adds. There is one more piece of evidence from the timeline of that night that rarely gets discussed in the context of the phone call, but that belongs in this analysis: a 911 call. On the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared, a 911 call was made reporting a woman screaming from inside or near a car window in the Catalina foothills area. Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly addressed this call. It was made in the same general area in the same general time frame of the abduction window.
A woman screaming from a car window in the Catalina foothills on the night of February 1st. If that woman was Nancy Guthrie, if she was conscious, if she was in a vehicle, if she was attempting to signal for help as she was being transported from her home, then the abduction timeline extends beyond the front porch. It extends into a vehicle, into a transport, into a route that passes through an area where at least one person heard something and called it in. And here is the connection to the phone call. If the 1:44 a.m. call was a coordination call, if it confirmed Nancy's location and the window was open, then what followed was rapid and deliberate. Camera disabled, physical confrontation at the porch, transport in a vehicle, a woman screaming from a car window somewhere in the Catalina foothills, and then 41 minutes of documented cardiac distress, ending at 2:28 when the pacemaker sync stopped. That is a complete operational sequence beginning to end, and the phone call at 1:44 is the moment someone decided to start the clock. Part 12. Why this call changes the prosecution timeline. Let me explain why the 1:44 a.m. phone call is not just investigatively significant, it is potentially prosecutorially decisive, because I think people underestimate what a single time-stamped communication can do to a criminal case. In a federal kidnapping prosecution, establishing conspiracy is critical. A kidnapping that involved multiple people or that involved coordination between a person with insider knowledge and a person who physically executed the abduction is a conspiracy. And conspiracy charges in federal kidnapping cases carry severe penalties separate from and in addition to the underlying kidnapping charges themselves. To establish conspiracy, prosecutors need to show an agreement between 2 or more people to commit a crime and at least one overt act in furtherance of that agreement. A phone call made 3 minutes before the crime began is an overt act, a documented, time-stamped, carrier record preserved overt act. If the person who made the 1:44 a.m. call can be connected to the planning of the abduction through their relationship with Nancy, through their geographic location at the time of the call, through any subsequent communications with the person who physically executed the abduction, that call becomes the evidentiary cornerstone of a conspiracy charge. This is why the FBI has been silent about this specific detail for 70 days. Not because they do not know about it. They have known about it since the moment they got the phone. It is because they are building the legal architecture around it. Every other piece of evidence, the DNA, the Bitcoin trail, the Sonora intelligence, each of these individually might be enough for an arrest, but together, built into a comprehensive, airtight evidentiary package that prosecutors can walk into a federal courtroom with and never lose, they require time.
Sheriff Nanos said in March that he believes investigators know the motive. He said the crime was targeted. He warned that the suspect could strike again, which is not a statement you make about an unknown threat. It is a statement you make about someone specific you are watching. All of this together, the known motive, the targeted nature confirmed publicly, the warning about striking again, the prolonged silence on specific evidence, paints the picture of a federal investigation that knows what happened and is building the case to prove it beyond any reasonable doubt. The 1:44 a.m. phone call is at the center of that case. Part 13. What 70 days of silence actually means. 70 days, no arrest, no named suspect, no charged individual, just silence from the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department on the most specific forensic details of this case. I want to address this silence directly because I think it is being misread by a lot of people covering this case. The silence is not failure. The silence is not a stalled investigation. In major federal kidnapping cases that involve complex conspiracy charges and international dimensions, the timeline between evidence collection and arrest is long by design. The FBI does not arrest when they have enough to be confident. They arrest when they have enough to guarantee a conviction that holds through appeal. Those are very different standards. The 1:44 a.m. phone call, the DNA evidence, the Bitcoin trail, the Sonora intelligence, each of these individually might be enough for an arrest, but together, built into a comprehensive, airtight evidentiary package that prosecutors can walk into a federal courtroom with and never lose, they require time. Sheriff Nanos said in March that he believes investigators know the motive. He said the crime was targeted. He warned that the suspect could strike again, which is not a statement you make about an unknown threat. It is a statement you make about someone specific you are watching. All of this together, the known motive, the targeted nature confirmed publicly, the warning about striking again, the prolonged silence on specific evidence, paints the picture of a federal investigation that knows what happened and is building the case to prove it beyond any reasonable doubt. The 1:44 a.m. phone call is at the center of that case.
It always has been. One phone call made 3 minutes before a masked man disabled the camera on an 84-year-old woman's front porch in Tucson, Arizona, made to a private number by someone who had access to that number, who knew Nancy was home and alone, who timed their call with the precision of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. Made on a phone that was left behind at the scene and has been in FBI possession for 70 days. That call is not a footnote in this investigation. It is the opening move, the starting gun of a 41-minute operation that was planned, coordinated, and executed by people who are not strangers to Nancy Guthrie's world. 70 days later, that call's record sits in an FBI evidence file. The number that made it is known. The carrier records are subpoenaed. The cell tower data places that device somewhere in the geography of that night, and investigators have been quietly, methodically building everything around that one time-stamped event. When the arrest comes, and it will come, trace it back, follow the thread backward, and it will lead you to 1:44 a.m., 3 minutes before the camera went dark. One phone call that was supposed to be untraceable. It was not. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see our full breakdown of the pacemaker data, what NY's own heart recorded during those 41 minutes, that video is linked right here. Watch it next. The two videos together give you the most complete forensic picture of what happened on the night of February 1st. Subscribe to Crime View. Turn on notifications. We are staying on this until Nancy comes home.